My name is VipinKumar. I'm from the University of Minnesota and part of the AI Climate Institute. And my talk is about combining the power of both traditional process-based modeling that's typically used in scientific domain, along with the advances in machine learning together to have this framework in which machine learning is being guided by scientific knowledge for decision making. And let me see. So let's see how we would sort of go about modeling a agricultural system. Well, you can sort of view it as a system, as an environmental system that is being impacted by physical drivers, largely things like weather, precipitation, temperature, and you're interested in some outputs from the response, which could be crop yield, a greenhouse gas emission. Maybe you're interested in seeing whether the field got invested by pests and so forth. The relationship between this response that you're seeing and the weather, this whole dynamics is being governed by some underlying characteristics, the quality of soil, maybe how you're managing the farm, how much fertilizer you're putting in, are you tilling the soil, are you planting cover crops? And in many cases, you have sensors in the system that observe the operations. Maybe there'll be some cheap sensor that somebody talked about this morning, but there could be satellites observing the data. Maybe you are flying drones and so forth. So this is sort of the totality. And if you could, idea is if you could really model the system very well to a good level of detail, then you can answer a whole bunch of questions. For example, what management practices should be used? How would you make one, as David put in the question, how do we make the agriculture sustainable and profitable and so forth and productive? So all of these questions, or whether should I apply a pesticide or whether should I apply fertilizer at a certain time? So all sorts of questions can be answered. And oftentimes, as David mentioned in the introduction, people have been building process-based model, like the systems like EcoSys, DAS, Descent, and so forth. They will use them to create a forward model in which you feed in the drivers and the characteristics in some form, maybe in the form of parameters, and you happen to get the response that you desire. More recently, there's a huge interest in AI models, machine learning models. And there's a lot of work on using the external observations, which are through the satellites, and using them to figure out what's going under the ground. So a lot of models that people are building using the observations that we have and modeling the response, maybe with or without the system characteristics. So there is a forward modeling, which is trying to understand this process. There is the inverse modeling aspect, which could be extremely important for answering many of the questions that we heard today, which is, I know the drivers, I know the response, I may even have the observations, and I'm trying to figure out what are the underlying characteristics are. Is the field irrigated? Is the field being tilled? Are the cover crops being planted? Or what is the crop that's on the ground? And information like that. And again, the process-based modeling is, of course, used for forward modeling. Machine learning is increasingly being used for forward modeling. And process-based models, of course, also use inverse modeling to find out the inherent characteristics, but it's a very expensive process. And increasingly, there is an interest in machine learning models as well to go there. So the question is, why would somebody be interested in building a process machine learning model? So this slide sort of shows you the potential limitations that people face when they work with process-guided models. First part is that you can never make a model perfect. You're always trying to approximate the underlying physics. Sometimes you don't know the physics. Sometimes you're simply approximating it because it's just too expensive to represent the phenomena, all aspects of the phenomena at every level of detail. There are scale accuracy trade-offs, which creates inherent bias in the modeling process, which means no matter how good the data you feed into the model, your results would be off. But then there's another problem, which is even the model that you're building has to have certain parameters. And as an example, you see the soil, a column on the left side. And if you knew the characteristic of soil at every different layer, your model would be more accurate. But oftentimes you would approximate the entire column by a single layer, in which case you need only one model to estimate. But you have a simpler model, you have fewer parameters, you can have more complex model, more parameters with each one parameter for each level. But then you have more parameters, then you need more data to calibrate them. And that sort of allows this notion of overfitting, which in the physical sciences community is called equifinality. That is, you may have completely different realizations of these model parameters that represent two different systems that are not to each other and may have very similar performance. So that means you have a very unhappy situation. So these are the two major problems that sort of people talk about in terms of modeling. But there's also a third very major problem with physical modeling, which is if you have a farm, if you have a plot, if you have a region that you are trying to model, and if you've instrumented the heck out of it, you could build fairly sophisticated process models, and you can make them do a good job on predicting the future. But if you go to another site, then you're in trouble, that you have to create a lot of data for that site as well. That means there could be some places where you can create a lot of observations, but you can't leverage them at other places that are less observed or unobserved. And this is another very major limitation of process models. So these are some of the reasons people have been thinking about going to the machine learning, and machine learning is beginning to be used. As you can sort of see, everybody's using it in every single discipline, but there are some pitfalls that people have. And one point that everybody talked about this morning is, well, the state-of-the-art machine learning algorithms require a lot of data, the kind of data that you don't have for training in any sciences, including agricultural sciences. And the other problem is because these models are essentially statistical in nature, they're only trying to find patterns in the data that's used for training. They have no idea about the underlying physics or the underlying processes. So they can create inconsistent scenarios, they can hallucinate, and essentially they're unable to generalize to scenarios that are not present in the training data. As someone talked about this morning, are they simply learning? Are they simply memorizing, or they're really learning something? And if they're only memorizing, that they can't really go out of sample. So because of all of these reasons, and because of the fact that you're dealing with problems that are really critical, there is a sort of a concern in using a lot of these methodology. One of the reasons for lack of adoption of machine learning is not having enough trust whether these methods can generalize. So this is where sort of we have a set of methods that are based on physics, in equations and such, first principle-based understanding, and they don't make much use of the data except to calibrate perhaps the parameter. On the other hand, you have this data science model, big machine learning models, that they don't have hundreds of parameters, they have hundreds of millions of parameters, maybe trillions of parameters as you go to the foundation model. And there are two extremes, and then of course the theory-based model would work well if you have a very good understanding of the physics and if you're able to calibrate the parameters, both of these are not true in many cases. And the big machine learning models work only if you have lots of data and they fail to generalize in scenarios unseen. So this talk is about a combination of these two methods, which basically build in the scientific knowledge that's embedded in the discipline into the machine learning model. So we call this theory-guided data science or knowledge-guided machine learning. And this basically allows these algorithms to use information like laws of nature and other things to build in. This is a very fast-growing area of research. Oops, I'm going in the wrong direction. Let me see. Okay. And it helps address the challenges like data sparsity, which we heard a lot about. Heterogeneity in space and time, it came in different words in different talks. That is, the phenomena, it changes from farm to farm, place to place. So a model built in one location may not work in a different location. And of course, the processes that underlie these environmental systems are evolving and interacting at different scales. There's a soil cycle, there's a water cycle, there's a carbon cycle, and they're all interacting with each other. How do you model them appropriately? And then the KGML methodology basically allows you to actually address many of these challenges by bringing in a more general loss functions, which can bring in the physical laws, which can bring in loss, not just from the accuracy, but also from conformation to physical laws. If you happen to know the PDs very accurately, then you could have this notion of physics-informed neural network where you take the PD loss and put into the loss function. You could also initialize these models, and that idea came up multiple times from many speakers. You could synthetic data, Jana just talked about a few minutes ago. You can use mechanistic model to pre-train machine learning models, and you could use self-supervision. That sort of is the foundation of foundation model, is the back of foundation model. But then you could, in the KGML framework, you can bring in the scientific understanding to figure out how to do self-supervision. And that's actually an extremely hot area of research. And I'll show you some results on knowledge-guided foundation model in just a few minutes. You can build the architectures in such a way that it takes into account the interaction between different processes. And all of these things can really improve the performance dramatically. And I'm just going to give you one example that's directly related to the work that we are doing in the AI climate, which is being able to model the greenhouse gas emission from farm. And if you could do an accurate job of it, and if you can figure out what management practices can improve the greenhouse gas emission, reduce it, then we can incentivize the farmers appropriately. And what this slide on the, with this graphic on the right bottom part is showing you is the dots are the N2O emissions over a period of time. And the green line is showing you the prediction by the process-based model EcoSys that was sort of calibrated for this place. And the blue line is showing you a plain machine learning algorithm, and both of them are very off from this dot line. And the red line is showing you a machine learning method, which basically was designed to mimic the structure of this process-guided model and was trained with mostly with the process simulated data from the process-guided model. And then you can see it doing an extremely good job of making predictions with the observations, giving you the R-square of 0.85 as opposed to 0.24 and something similar for the other models. There is, and this is sort of this more recent Nature paper that just came out of our group, shows you the different components of the KGML framework and how they really reach up to the high performance. Now, there is one more thing I just want to come back to, which is the ability of this KGML framework to take the information from highly observed regions to sparsely observed regions. And you can sort of see here that if you have green region in which you may have places where you have a lot of sensor data that you have collected, and you can potentially use it to calibrate your model or build machine learning model. And the question here is, can you leverage that information to go out of completely out of scenario in which you're going to you're doing extrapolation in both space and time. And that is something that's not possible using physical model, but in using machine learning framework, especially KGML framework, actually you can do that. And this is one of the things that we are sort of trying to do in the AI climate for the farms. And the next slide is simply show that this framework we have demonstrated in the context of being able to build the dynamics of stream temperature or the lake temperature for the entire US for 185,000 lakes, even though data is available only for about 12,000 lakes. So this methodology has been shown to work in a very real context. This is the next slide is sort of showing you that this one is sort of showing you that you can sort of also emulate in the KGML framework the processes that are unfolding at different time scales. And as a result, you can assimilate data. And this blue line is showing you that you can meet the observations 7 days in advance. That is, you're doing forecasting, and then by simulation, you are making very, very accurate prediction. I'd like to just conclude by talking for a few minutes on this, our first work on knowledge-guided foundation model in agriculture. As you heard this morning, there's a tremendous interest in being able, actually through the entire day today, there's tremendous interest in using the foundation models in the agricultural domain, like any other domain. And in the context of agriculture, at least half a dozen models have been built, and they're all built around being able to use the satellite data and relationship between satellite data and the land cover. And then the way they work is you take this series of satellite time series, you bring them through an encoder, and then these satellite time series snapshots are masked randomly, and then you decode them, and then you try to reconstruct. And in the process, you learn something about the land surface methodology. And what we're talking about in this knowledge-guided framework is we're realizing that the satellite is only observing the system that is impacted by the weather. So what we're trying to do is bring in both the weather and the satellite time series together to see how we can understand the underlying dynamics. And what you're showing here at the bottom is the result of that model. The first 6 pictures that you see here are the images that are trained into this foundation model. It predicts the 7th series, which is arbitrary time into the future. In this particular case, from the last image, you are being asked to predict 120 days into the future. And then you can see after 4 months, I'm showing you the ground truth, and the next one is showing you the model, the result predicted by the model. And you can see that it can take a farm which was sort of bare 4 months before and became green 4 months later, and it makes it green. And it sees the 3 circles, which are shown by the green arrow, which were harvested 3-4 months later, and it harvests them. Whereas if you don't use the weather and the satellite data, the very last model, which is a standard foundation model, it does neither. And there are a whole bunch of examples like these that sort of are shown. The next one is sort of simply showing you the same thing in the context of downstream tasks, like being able to do the crop mapping, and shows the power of being able to build KGML models. So with that, I think I'm out of time. I'm going to stop here, and I guess David is going to handle the questions now. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Wow, that was a great session. We had a lot of interesting presentations. Unfortunately, we don't have much time left for any questions, so I'll take one question. You ready, Binayak?
I'm Binayak Mohanty. The question here is that the physics-based models are also, you might have heard about stationarity is dead. In other words, the processes that we know prior may not work for the future. So similarly, for the data side, maybe the data, whatever we have not seen before, may not be applicable for the future. So in that context, how would you take the physics versus the data-driven models?
I guess this is exactly what this KGML framework was sort of trying to show, that if you only rely upon the traditional machine learning methodology, you can only find patterns in the data that you give it for training. Whereas physics models are supposed to work in any environment except they don't have the right parameters. But if you combine them, there is a possibility of being able to go to the future in unseen scenarios. Now, this last example I showed you on the foundation model is an example of that. That is, system itself is sort of telling you what happens 4 months later, even though it doesn't have access to it. But there are other examples I could illustrate using the KGML frame.
Okay, so I think Jessica's going to end this now, but let me just say this was great. We need foundation models with KGML, with conformal learning and uncertainty analysis, and we need 1,000 farms to do all that. So that's what I took away from all of this. Thank you, everybody.